Hello, everyone. Welcome. Wednesday night, Simon Jacobson. It's my honor to be the master of ceremonies and try to find some relevant message in the timeless wisdom of the Torah. It goes back thousands of years, applying it to our lives today. Because at the end of the day, we're all busy people with all kinds of options, especially in today's technological world. So why would one turn to, let's say, the chapter of the Torah, or to any text that may be ancient and seemingly out of date and out of time and out of location? The events that happened back in biblical times are so long ago, a different world. And yet the Bible remains the biggest bestseller. But the obvious question is why? How do we find a message? But if you look at the Torah as a blueprint for life, which means it's not just a historical manual that documents the chronological events that took place back in the biblical times, but actually a spiritual blueprint. Which means that, as some of the great mystics write, that the Torah really speaks about things up there and alludes to things down here. In other words, the Torah really is a spiritual guide that speaks in the language, Dibra Torah Keloshim Bnei Adam, it speaks in the language of man. But in essence, it's really talking about the story of our own souls and our own destinies and of the cosmos. And every character and every episode and every narrative is all part of our own personal narrative. When you take that approach, and then you ask then the question, the provocative question, what is the Torah's relevance to me right here, right now? You ask the question, why should I care about these messages? Then you begin to have a glimpse of an answer because you're asking the right question. If you do indeed see the Torah as an ancient, archaic text about events in the past, it's going to be more difficult, very difficult to find relevance in most of the stories. There's always some universal messages, as we know, the story of the Garden of Eden, good and evil, the different episodes, the wrestling with the angel, the story of the Exodus from Egypt, many stories that have become part of our culture. But most of the Torah would seem completely out of date. Many laws are not applicable even today. We don't have a temple. So with that in mind, the Torah consists of 5 books and consists of 52 chapters, which correspond to 52 weeks of the year. In effect, every chapter has one section, so you have, in effect, for every day of the week, you have a corresponding section. So we're right now about to conclude the second book of Exodus, the chapter Perkudei. And being that it's a leap year, a Hebrew leap year, as I've mentioned a number of times, is an additional month, not just an additional day, additional month to reconcile between the discrepancy between the lunar and the solar cycles. So you have an additional month called Adar. So we're now in the first month of Adar, and there'll be another month of Adar when we celebrate Purim. So in that case, we have actually more than 52 weeks because of the additional month. So some of the chapters of the Torah that we usually read together are split into 2. So this week's chapter is usually read with the previous chapter, Vayakel and Perkudei, the last 2 chapters of Exodus. But this year, and as a number of years, they're split into 2, and we read them 2 separate weeks. And it actually has very deep significance. Because if you look at even the title and the name of the chapters, Vayakel means to gather. As I discussed at length last week, the idea of group, herd mentality, conformity. Perkudei means to count. Eila Perkudei means this is the count. Counting something is the exact opposite of grouping it together. Because to count, you have to count individuals. You can't just look at a group and say, you have to know each specific detail. So every year we read these 2 together where the group and the individual come together. Here we have 1 week focusing on gathering, a group. What we discussed last week, synergy, and this week the focus is on individuality. And hence the title of this class, Individuality, Discovering, Finding Your Unique Voice. Now, individuality is a very interesting word and even phenomenon. Today it's considered our birthright, a given. United States, we have the Bill of Rights established to protect the inalienable rights of every human being. All men are created equal, as stated in the Declaration of Independence. But that's only a phenomenon of 300 years ago. What was the world like before we had these basic freedoms? What was the world like? The world was like I remember at the end of the century, at the end of the millennium actually, the year 2000, the New York Times had a special magazine issue, and it was called the Me Millennium. It's a very fascinating account of the major events that took place in the second millennium, which is from the year 1000 to 2000. And they categorized it that one of the big changes, as opposed to the first millennium, really I would say the second half of the second millennium, which means really from the 14th, 15th century and on, what we consider to be the Renaissance, followed by Enlightenment for the Jews, emancipation of the Jews, leading into the Industrial Revolution, leading into the atomic, nuclear, and final computer and information age that we live in. As historians already have documented that society, at least modern history, consists of, initially, it was an agrarian society, an agricultural society, that turned into an industrial society, and now into a computerized society. And there's a major impact on everything from living in cities and commuting to issues of privacy and so on. In an agrarian society, people lived a commune around farms because people's sustenance was a result of their work. So if everything was around agriculture. As such, in a world like that, there was far less individuality than we have today. Simply based on that itself, because there had to be so much cooperation, such dependency, that there was a very close type of knit communities. But in addition to that, if you look in the political side of things, the world was really dominated by autocrats, by monarchs, by the church, by despots, by dictators, who were the ones that had sole control over the destiny of everybody's lives. There was no such thing as individuality. There was no such thing as rights, even, individual rights. The leader decided what is right, what is wrong, for good or for bad. If you had a benevolent despot, great. If not, too bad. The masses were not trusted, were not given any power. There wasn't even a value to individual rights. There were no rebellions. If there were rebellions, it was one monarch overthrowing another one. But you didn't have the concept of individuals standing up for themselves. As documented in that magazine, you can look it up also in any type of research, the concept of private space didn't exist. Private space didn't exist. Private space meant people lived in groups. People lived in communes. People lived in... the idea of having your private room or private apartment was non-existent. So, across the board, wherever you looked, the concept of individual was almost non-existent. We'll soon get to the Torah, what the Jews were doing during that time. So now, in the second half of this millennium, what happened was, slowly, it didn't happen overnight, and there are many reasons for it, many causes due to the expanding of technology and science, which in turn led to all kinds of new options, leading the world from an agricultural society to an industrial one, and many other factors. The corruption of the church began wearing down on people, the corruption of leaders, more communication. As people began to advance, they began to rebel against the misery of this type of being put into groups. And the birth of human rights began. There are many different theories when exactly it was first espoused, when it caught on. I mean, Aristotle talks about it, and others do as well. But still, it didn't catch on, definitely not an institutionalized level. And the United States is credited to be the first country that institutionalized rights, individual rights. But then something interesting happened. It wasn't just everything now balanced out. Individual rights became, in itself, a monster. As it began growing, people started wondering, how will these individuals ever communicate with each other? And literal wars were fought over this. The Civil War in the United States was exactly that. Here was the United States built on the principles of rights. The South wanted the right to have slavery. The North did not necessarily for noble reasons, because it was more industrial and they didn't need slaves as much. And so there was an actual war that tore apart this country. A country was built on rights, because here the rights suddenly conflicted. So many even argue that the monarchs, the autocrats may have had it right, because they at least kept order. It's true. They may have been horrible leaders, but at least there was no anarchy. Today the discussions are being held even about President Putin in Russia and other countries of this type of leadership. How much real freedoms do you give people and how much? The battles rage on. And logically, philosophically speaking, when you give people the individuality, what happens? How does one temper fierce individuality that begins to just simply swamp and consume everything in its path? If you talk about hardcore capitalism and read Karl Marx's critique, scathing critique, it's an excellent critique. He didn't have maybe necessarily a viable alternative, but it's an excellent critique of what happens when money becomes a driving force. Once upon a time, that wasn't the case. When individuals are given money, it always leads to more selfishness. And selfishness always leads to a breakdown of relationships, and a breakdown of marriage, and a breakdown of the family. That's what the nature of selfishness is. So individuality and selfishness is a very thin line between the two. All these issues, interestingly and fascinatingly, are essentially the theme of these two chapters. Vayakil is about the group, and Perkudei is about the individual. Last week we discussed about healthy and unhealthy groups, synergy, healthy synergy versus herd and negative herd mentality, and today we'll discuss healthy and unhealthy individuality. Now, it should be established clearly that the way God created the human being, as the Mishnah says in Sanhedrin, He created the human being as an individual. Lefikach nivra adam yechidi. This is why God created everyone as an individual, because chayav adam, a person is responsible to say the world was created because of me, not out of arrogance, but out of responsibility. You can't blame anyone else. You're responsible for your behavior and your impact on your environment and the world around you. To the point that when you save a life, it's like saving a universe. When you kill a life, God forbid, you kill a universe. So individuality is the way we were created. But that would be beautiful in a world where there was no temptations and there was no side shows that seduce and distract us. So then we have our individuality, and each of us find our way to play our song, to play our music, to sing our song with our unique voice, and connect to our calling, to our purpose and calling in life. The thing is, the way God created the world, He wanted it to be a challenge. So He took the individual and the individual soul with its unique voice and embedded it into a world, a material world, as the mystics put it, concealed our calling. And now suddenly a new consciousness arose. Look at the obsession people have with materialism, with money. Always justified with all kinds of good things. Everyone knows you can't take one penny with you to the next world. And yet people to the last second will fight over it, will hoard it, will consider it to be their definition of power and control and guilt and strength and so on. Because this material world creates a mass hypnosis where we are convinced that what is valuable is what is in the here and now. We define our self-worth by our net worth, and the whole material world takes over. So now, no longer you're dealing with just an individual finding your voice and communicating with a higher purpose. You have a whole distraction. You build your business, you build your success, you see that as your most important thing in life, and that becomes the force. Mix that with individuality, and you got yourself a big lethal potent combination, because you're not dealing here with now an individuality that's healthy. You're dealing with an individuality that's selfish, and therefore you could have the argument, as the socialists argued, people like that don't deserve private property, and they don't deserve to own anything because they're corrupted. Their whole beings are defined by their own self-absorption and self-interest, which was the strong philosophical argument of Marx and others against the capitalist system. What's the response? The Torah's response is, yes, vayakil is necessary. We need to have the group, but the individual ultimately is one redeeming factor. To regain the value of being an individual, the individual has to focus on a divine purpose. As I said, the Mishnah says God created us individuals for a reason. To know that you're responsible. Not to be able to just say, me, and I want more. The exact opposite of selfishness. And that's the battle. Will you be a selfish entity, or will you be a giving entity? And this is not theoretical, and it's not abstract. It's measured in very direct ways. The Torah talks about charity. It talks about being a giving person, being not manipulative and conniving, all about getting what you want, dressing it up in all types of beautiful arguments. It's about, are you a really giving person? Are you living up to the purpose that why your soul came down to earth to serve? Or are you serving yourself? That's what it comes down to. And it's really not, there's really no gray line here. It's not gray, it's pretty black and white. There's gray in the sense of how it manifests, but a pretty black and white. 99.9% of the world has, whether they've chosen or by default, live a life of self-absorption. Here and there are noble altruistic acts. But overall, it's about me. Survival of the fittest. That's the power of the material world. But there are the few that are wise enough and have seen through it. And that's what the Torah comes to advocate, to change, to shift the consciousness from me to you, from me to some higher purpose. Now, can you expect someone to suddenly change their entire course? No, but you could expect at least to live up to a higher standard. And the interesting thing is, happiness, eternity, love, truth, God, soul, are all in the domain of that little 1% that are ready to not just be self-absorbed. Self-absorption is very nice for the short term, but it has no long-term benefits. Nothing comes from it. Any self-absorbed person, when they die, nothing remains of it. They can't take any of that with them. Everything remains here, and that's that. Those that have given, those that have served in this world, change the world forever. Their legacy lives on and on and on, forever. Even that motivation is still not enough to get so many people, the people out of the quagmire and the quicksand of material, the swamp. Because the power, as the Arizal says, of the Tzimtzum is unbelievable. It's enormous. The power of the hold, the force of material world that holds us, is so powerful that it's hard for us to pull ourselves out of it. Well, that's why there were the Jewish people. Go back to the time of Abraham. Abraham made a conscious and active decision to go against the tide. He refused to become a self-absorbed, a self-worshipping person. And he began to search for a higher calling. He began to search for God. And when he recognized it, he immediately understood that the commitment is Lasa is Daka Mishpat, a commitment of life forever, for him, his children, his family, and his generations to come, to do Mishpat, charity and justice and virtue, which was against the grain. It's still against the grain of people. But that's what he came to be aware of and realized that that's really the calling of our soul. And deep inside, everybody knows that is definitely the higher calling. It's just we're trapped. We can't pull ourselves out of it. So the concept of individuality is sacred. But not because we have you can do whatever you want and no one can tell you what to do and what right does someone have to impose themselves. It's sacred because that individual has the power to change the world. If individuality spills over into narcissism, into selfishness, then the individuality is a distorted and unhealthy one that does not do anyone good. Even the person himself doesn't do good. Look at nature, as I discussed last week in the synergy side of things. In nature, in the human body, imagine one of your organs decided to become a narcissist. And when you eat up all resources, you eat a meal, the first organ says, I want it all. And it would never reach the rest of your body. Imagine your organs decided to start playing the selfish game. We would be dead within minutes, if not less. The beauty of nature, the beauty of the human body is that it spreads it out. The blood circulates through all the body. Different vitamins and nutrients go to the different parts of the body, the ones that need them. Waste is eliminated. It's a cooperation. It's a synergy. And each part is valued because every component is necessary. But only because none of them are doing more than they need to do or less. It's like the perfect balance. Not grabbing more and not taking less. In nature is exactly the same thing. The balance of nature, the way species multiply, the way species consume each other, all keeps a beautiful balance. Again, until a human being may come in and upset the balance. So we have before our own eyes, sorry, for my flesh I behold God. In our own eyes we see. With our own eyes we can see. We can see the symbiosis and the cooperation and this interconnectivity, cross-pollination of a universe. But the difference is in nature and our human body, there's no free choice. If you gave free choice to the organs, we may have the same mess and chaos and anarchy that we have in the human race. Human beings were given free choice. So we can choose, are we going to work like the body and like nature in cooperation and realize that each of us is an indispensable musical note that needs all the other notes to work with, or we won't. So that's the focus of this chapter, Perkudei. Ele Perkudei Mishkan, that Moses gives an accounting for each detail. Not just the whole picture, not just the group, but each detail. Because every detail is necessary. Nothing more necessary, nothing extra, and nothing missing. When Mozart presented one of his symphonies to the Archduke of Austria, so the Archduke, who thought he was a connoisseur of music, said to Mozart, beautiful music, but far too many notes. He thought it was too many notes. So Mozart famously replied, he said, yes, Your Majesty, but not one more than necessary. You see this in nature, as I said, you see it in the human body. You look at the human body, there's many parts. Today we know that every part is exactly what's necessary in a healthy body. There are two parts in the body that are still unknown what they're needed for. One is the appendix, and the second is the wisdom teeth. In my days as a child, there was also the tonsils, which is why they removed tonsils from many kids in the 50s, in the early 60s. So they realized that had a benefit too. I think they're now discovering also the benefit of the appendix. But the wisdom teeth still remain a mystery. Okay, so if you have 75 trillion cells in the body, and you have thousands and thousands of limbs and organs and nerves and veins and arteries and so on, and vessels, and they all have an exact purpose and reason. And you can't figure out what their function is, what does logic dictate? It definitely doesn't dictate that the whole thing is chaotic. It dictates that you just haven't figured it out yet. If you see something that's made up of thousands of parts, it's all working, and two parts aren't working, what's the natural conclusion is that probably also has a purpose. I haven't found out yet. If 99% of it is not functioning, and you have one thing that is, obviously the conclusion is the other way around. So we have this tremendous order, and literally blessed, we see it before our own eyes. We're blessed with healthy children, with our own health. Look in the mirror. Think about your life. Think how many mechanisms have to work for you to just take down a gulp of air down your lungs, or to swallow a piece of food. It's a whole process. You know how many chambers and valves, and if you had to replicate it in a machine, you'd see how many pieces of parts you'd need and how much it would cost. This human body is extremely efficient. A 5'6" tall frame, barely 100, 200 pounds. And look what goes on inside of it. Not even getting into the intricacies of the brain. So Perkudei emphasizes the individual power of each one of us. We have something extremely unique. But here's the big bit, the big if, or the big but. But will we understand, appreciate that individuality? Now look at relationships. Relationships is always a litmus test, a type of, I could say a lightning rod. Because there, two people have to come together. And how do they interact with each other? So if the individual is a selfish entity, and that's its whole power, then the self becomes a conflict with another self. So how can a relationship like that thrive? Only one way. If one dominates and the other one is passive. That way, it works. But if both are going to be a sense of self, who's going to win? What happens when there's a conflict of interest? There's different opinions. So relationships immediately have this issue right on the table. So most people find ways to compromise. They say, you know what, I give this because I get that. It's a type of give and take where, like a negotiation, as long as that can last. Is there hope for something deeper? And the answer is absolutely. Perkudei teaches that the individual is not doomed to selfishness. The self, as the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, says, the self is rooted in the divine self. It has an unbelievable unique element to it. That uniqueness is not about selfishness, it's about uniqueness. It's very different. It goes hand in hand with being humble and selfless. So you say self and selfless sounds like a contradiction. No, not necessarily. Because if the self is dedicated to something that's more than what the self is about, then it's a selfless self, so to speak. If the self is dedicated only to its own needs, then it becomes a selfish self. So the idea of individuality is not inherent to it to be selfish. You'll meet people who are very, very strong and fiercely individualistic, very, very unique, they're very original, do not conform, and yet they dedicate their lives to others. They love other people. They know how to love someone, they know how to give. You say, how's that possible? They're so individual, why aren't they just hoarding? Because they're not insecure. They're secure selves, and their self does not dictate necessarily that they have to annihilate others. That is a healthy Perkudei. So in a year like this, where we have a Yaakov Perkudei as separate chapters, it's like 2 different weeks to focus on 2 different elements. Last week was the focus on your healthy and unhealthy conformity, and this week is the focus on being a healthy and unhealthy individuality. The unhealthy sort is all around us. It manifests in many different ways. And in interesting ways, sometimes that individual doesn't even deserve to be an individual when they become so narcissistic. Because they're taking a gift that was given to them to be unique, and instead just turning it into a vacuum cleaner of draining everything in order for me to feed. A parasite. That's a parasite. A parasite also has a self, but its self is all about absorbing others. Then there's Meitzi, Machnis ve'ena Meitzi. It takes in, but never gives out. Then you have entities that are the other way around. They're giving. There's a self there. There's an individual. But their role is to give. They use their uniqueness to give. Now think for a moment. Who's more unique, the giver or the taker? Taking, we're all equal. Yeah, we may have different manipulative methods how to take, but taking doesn't say anything unique about you. 2 takers, they just take. The only thing that distinguishes them is that they know how to take. When you give, it has to be on your terms. It has to be, what are you giving? You're giving of your uniqueness. You're giving of something that makes you stand out, and you're sharing that with others. So 2 people are going to give very differently based on their personalities. When it comes to taking, as I said, the only reason the personality comes into play because personalities have different tools or methods or manipulation to take. But there's nothing fundamental because yourself is not even in play. The self is sitting intact in its own little place and sending out, so to speak, its tentacles to grab, to acquire, to take, and to build and to hoard. The self is not even involved in it. Yeah, it may be innovative in coming up with business ideas, different strategies, and so on. Whereas in giving, it comes down to you give of yourself. You give love, you teach someone something, you share. You're sharing what you have. And in effect, you're becoming far stronger self than the other one. Additionally, as I mentioned, security and insecurity. An insecure self is always threatened. Because it always feels, unconsciously, people don't like to admit this, it always fears that I'm going to lose something. A secure individual There's no fear. When there's no fear, sharing is very easy. It's the fear that I may lose out, someone else is going to take something from me. Basically, everything becomes a threat. Secure people, there's nothing that's a threat. I teach every morning, there's a very dense discourse called Ayin Beis. And the chapters we're learning now, 230, 231, those chapters, talks extensively about eminence. In Hebrew, the word is Shemos. Eminence, majesty, esteem. Sometimes you're in the presence of someone and you feel you're in the presence of greatness. Without every person even saying anything, they give off an aura of aristocracy, of esteem, of eminence. Then there are people who impose their eminence. They want to show and demonstrate that I'm more powerful, I'm more valuable. And he has a very fascinating analysis about, doesn't use the word insecurity, it's in Hebrew, but he talks about people who dismiss everything because they are the most eminent, preeminent entity. And the reason they dismiss it is not because it doesn't have any value, because it all threatens them. That's why they have to dismiss it. They dismiss everything because everything is a threat to their turf. A definition of what a real, we call a yesh is, what a real selfish identity is in this world. I'll never forget. And then I'll tell what I was going to say in a moment. Then there's real remumus. Real eminence, he explains, is someone that doesn't have to impose themselves. No one can take anything away from them because it's radiating from within. It's not about control. Nothing is a threat to them, and therefore they value and they give significance to everything. Everything is important to them. Because they're not consumed with this competitive element. They're not fighting for their own identity. We live in a world where we've been taught, and we've unfortunately learned from experience, if you don't fight for your needs, no one else will. And people will take something from you. So we devise all kinds of schemes and we maneuver with all kinds of machinations to figure out how to take care of ourselves. Often happens, it starts at home. You grow up in a home where our parents are unhealthy in the way they relate, and their insecurities are projected on their children. I remember someone telling me once coming to this class, he said to me, one of the things that was really just so damaging in my childhood was, he said, I grew up in a relatively wealthy home, but my mother was jealous of everybody and everything. We once went to a party, and at the party, on the way home, my mother started carrying on about the hosts, because they had a chandelier that was similar to the chandelier we had in our home. And she couldn't stand the fact that they had a chandelier because they thought they were unique in their chandelier. She says, I was a little 8-year-old, and she was carrying on how horrible they are, and so on and so forth. And as a child, you're impressionable, and you pick up everything, you think she's right. She says, years of therapy I had to work on cutting out for myself this jealousy. Realizing that my mother was simply sick. She was simply unhealthy, selfish, insecure. So what do you care? They have a chandelier. How does that make you less? Her value is based on that she has this chandelier and they don't have it. And she says, he told me, I never forget the simcha, the joy my mother had when she was speaking to that hostess, and the hostess told her that, the chandelier we had was actually not the same quality that you have, from a different company. And it changed her whole mood. Now she's back to being unique again. Later, this guy told me, years later, he went to speak to her, and the woman was smarter than his mother. She actually had a more expensive chandelier, but she saw how bitter she became. She decided to just tell her that, to make her feel good. Can you imagine a person's whole life is defined by some acquisition, some piece of property? I mean, it's pathetic when you think about it. But don't think all of us is beyond us all. We all have stuff like that, where you have some type of fixation or something you think is important, and that becomes the most important thing. Then, years pass, or God forbid, sometimes things happen, you realize how insignificant that is. I remember a September 11th story here. There was a fellow who came to me during that first year after the attack, and he told me that it really felt horrible because he had a friend who had a beautiful, spacious office on the 111th or 10th, I don't know how many floors were there in that building. One of those floors all the way up there, who had this view of the whole city, up there, the whole Trade Center. He says, I had a little office, and every time I look out the window and I saw that office, I just couldn't stand the fact that my friend has this office. And then the day came and his friend is no longer here. Because in this beautiful, spacious office, he was one of the people who were one of the casualties of the attack. And he couldn't come to himself. He says, I used to wish that he would die, but in a childish way. And he says, now I see it's unbelievable to me, life and death, and he's feels horrible. Obviously he's not to blame for the attack, but he realized suddenly how petty you can be. We all have moments like this, I'm sure more than moments, because as I've explained, the tzimtzum, the concealment of what matters in this world, turns us into such superficial, petty creatures that literally we can go to war for things that are absolutely meaningless. But the only way to recognize that is if you have an alternative. If you think your chandelier, your little farm, your little whatever is the most important thing on earth, obviously you have no alternative. But if you have an alternative, and you realize that alternative is a completely different league, that puts things into context. But a person who's a hoarder, or a person who's a selfish, insecure person, everything is defined by what they grab and what they acquire, as opposed to recognizing some deeper sense of self. It's sad. It's sad that so many people don't really know that really your individuality is a sacred thing, and if you only embraced it in the right way, in the divine way, recognizing that you have something unique to contribute to this world, your whole life would be a happier life. And yet, it's completely inverted, where people start using that self in a selfish way, only to reinforce the insecurities and the fears and everything that comes with trying to hold on to something, because you think that's what your identity is defined by. I'll never forget my father telling me, my father grew up in Stalinist Russia, and his father himself was a person who was Mesiris Nefesh. He gave his life for helping Jews in the difficult times when the Soviet Union forbade everything that's Jewish, from synagogues to kosher to circumcisions to everything. So he became part of a small group that went to do everything possible to maintain the spark in that difficult world. I remember him telling me the following. He said my grandfather was finally arrested, what they call counter-revolutionary activity, which means basically against the state. And most people who were arrested were shot immediately. There was no due process, forget about that. He actually miraculously was saved, and he came out of Russia, he ended up in Toronto. But I remember my father telling me he was a little boy, and his father was gone. And here he had his mother, who was 27 years old maybe, with two little babies, my father and his brother. And for all intents and purposes, thought for sure, orphans, and she's a widower. And she would cry. My father told me he remembers his mother crying for hours every night. She would go every day to the government offices to find out any information on him. You wait all day online to find out, to come back the next day. My father remembers one night, he hears a knock on the door. His mother was somewhat frightened, but she opened the door. She sees a chassid, a well-known chassid in Moscow. They lived in Moscow. He's at the door. He comes in. My father was a little kid, so he was standing on the side. This chassid has a sack, a small little sack. They called them tsenolach in Russia. It was money. He put down a substantial amount of money. You could say what would be the value of today, $100,000. And said, you may need this because your husband is no longer here. So I'm just bringing this to you. This was not a relative. It was not even a friend from the family. He was a chassid in town. They knew him. And my father told me, I remember when he said it to me, it struck me. I said, was this common? He said, yeah, because there were no bank accounts. There were no IRAs. There were no retirement accounts. We were going nowhere. Everybody was going to die in this God-forsaken place. It was like you're in prison, basically. So the concept of having my account, your account, this guy ran into money. She needed it. He shared it. It was without even a question. And like you said once, let me save it for something. So I said to my father, so how did that, what happened when you came over the ocean to this part of the world? He said, everything changed. The comforts of this world, of course, our world is much more a greater blessing. But right there you see, I always think about this, a vivid contrast of healthy self and unhealthy self. So all of us, of course, we feel blessed in a country like ours, in a world of prosperity, where basically you can try to make as much money as you want and no one's going to confiscate it from you. And you can save it, and you can invest it, and you can do everything. And what happens to a person? So they say, okay, so they become wealthy, and they become successful, and then what? So their life is easy. Yeah. What's left from that? Okay, they make their family life easy. What happens at the end of the day is you can lose your soul completely. At the same time, it's still a blessing. Judaism does not see wealth as a curse. It does not see poverty as a blessing. It sees wealth as a blessing. But it never forgets the power. That never forgets the power. What can happen when you get so consumed with yourself? That's why the only redemption to the narcissism that materialism creates is tzedakah. That was the brilliance of Judaism. Not the socialists, and not some other methods, not taxation systems, but it was understood that if you want to free yourself from the bondage of self-worship, you have to be a giver. It's the only antidote to being a healthy individual. And if you don't know how to give, the more you take, the more it will become a noose around your neck, and the heavier load it will become and destroy who you are, destroy your soul. And how many souls have been destroyed by prosperity? I say destroyed is a strong word. I don't believe a soul can be destroyed. I mean in a figurative way, destroyed as in all practical purposes. Because to have wealth is a great responsibility and a great gift, but the great challenge is not to ever think, like the Torah says, the keichev v'eitzim yad, this is my thing, it's my power, and I'm self-made, and look how great I am because I've accomplished this, and look at everybody else, they can't do close to what I've done. That always will lead, that arrogance will lead to literally one's soul being sold into slavery. But as much as all this is said, as I said earlier, we can all know this, we read in the books, it makes sense. When push comes to shove, we go right back to it. Because Olam Hazeh Gashmi, the physical world, and this is the way God created it, and the Rizal explains it with a big tzimtzum, conceal the divine presence. So to see a healthy individual embrace their individuality through giving instead of through taking is not so common. When you see it, those are the people that change the world. You go through history, look at who changed the world, were the people who used their individuality to give, not to take. And most people use their individuality to take and not to give. So, yes, there's the other alternative that annihilate individuality, let's everyone become a group. But that's not what God wanted either. As I said, Lefikach Nivra Adam Yechidi, God wanted to create individuals. But He wanted us to be wise enough that your uniqueness is not about becoming a hoarder and becoming someone that becomes a parasite, but your uniqueness is to give of your uniqueness. And you have to ask yourself a simple question, especially if you're a believer. There was a time that you were not here on this earth. A choice was made by someone, we know it's God, to send your soul down to this earth. And you came down to this world, into a family, hopefully a healthy family, parents. And now you've entered. The child has entered into this world. A newborn child has no clue what materialism is. There's no clue what money is. All it knows is, I'm a soul that has entered into this world. If you could interview a newborn, you'd probably hear the newborn say, I was sent to fulfill a purpose in this world. And then what happens? As the child grows, it begins to assume all the attitudes of parents, educators, the street, peer, the media, and it changes its whole course. Instead of, I came down to fulfill a purpose in this world, I came down to take care of myself. Complete hijacking of the agenda, of the mission. Think of it like this: you start a business, you hire someone to run the business, you let them run it, you come back, they decided to do something completely different. It's no longer the mission of this business. However, in this case, God did give us that free choice, that free will. But that's the story, in a nutshell. Most of us are living a life like a lie. We're living a lie. We're living a life that has nothing to do with the reason we were sent to this earth. Now, we're doing things, maybe some good things, and we're fulfilling some purpose, and hopefully some of it is going in some good direction as well. We're out to the usual justifications. What do you mean? I'm bringing up a healthy, good family, sending them to yeshiva or to getting good Jewish education. I give charity. I'm ethical. Let's even say a person has all that going for them. That's all nice and absolutely, obviously better than someone that doesn't have any of that. But is that why your soul came down? Is that it? Is there more to it? Where's all your uniqueness? Where's all your ingenuity and your innovation going? Most people in business, or in some hobby, or in some other sideshow. Very few can say, I'm putting it into illuminating this world in some way. Now this is because we don't think with our souls, we think with our bodies. Think of it like this. Imagine you're given a tool chest. And instead of your hand telling the hammer what to do, the hammer tells the hand what to do. That's the case. We live in a world, the material world is telling our soul where to go. Where do you want to go today? I have a business meeting, I have to do this, I have to do that. Maybe we should be the other way around. Your body should ask your soul, where do you want to go today? Now, our bodies usually don't do that, so it takes a little work to get to that place. But so it comes down to ultimately the means and the end. What's an emtsoi, which is a means to a goal? What is the ultimate goal? And the challenge we have in our material world is far greater than our grandparents had. Because there they had no choice. They were being chased, persecuted. They had to fight for everything they believed in. There was no taking anything for granted. Today it's all for granted. So it becomes very easy to become, what they call in Hebrew, adishut, they call it complacency. Gleichgültigkeit in Yiddish. So it becomes a type of like apathy. And days go by. So I always remember the story with my father because I always think of, not God forbid we want to go back to a world like that where you have to constantly live in terror and fear. But there's a certain beauty to hear about someone who money didn't make a difference and people just shared because they were going nowhere. So all they had was each other. I was once by a meeting, so-called meeting. It was a weekend. It was one of these conferences where different people coming and teaching and so on. But afterwards, they had a closed session meeting, and they invited me in as well. And they were talking about things you can do for Jewish education, for assimilation. It was an interesting meeting. And then people started fighting about some different opinions between how things should be done. This one said it's great, this one said it's terrible. Fighting. And it was like, bottom line was a petty fight about who's going to run the show, essentially. It's like mi baresh, like who's going to be the chairman. And I remember a guy who was from England, because he had a very strong English accent. And he stands up, he was like so furious. He was like a more secular person, but he was there as well, the meeting. And I remember he yells and says, it's like you bloody fighting about like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, The Titanic, as you know, was a ship that was going down. And imagine there's a whole meeting in one of the boardrooms, which deck chair is going to go where, when the whole damn ship is going down. The way he said it, I remember it was so, I couldn't stop laughing. I burst out laughing. Because it was like it captured to me so many asifas and so many meetings. You meet them, you talk about everything. The whole damn ship is going down, and we're arguing what are we having for dessert. So it's just interesting. I feel blessed that I'm not indebted to any board or have to answer as a pulpit rabbis. I chose not to be a pulpit rabbi for a reason, because I didn't want to deal with bureaucracies, and I didn't want to deal with board meetings. I didn't want to deal with all the politics. And I have to say my decision was, I still stand by it. I see others, my colleagues, who suffer in different ways. there's a price to pay because you have to build everything on your own because you don't have anybody. No one's giving you anything if they don't have power. Okay, but that's the small price you pay for being an individual. But I think about it and I see there's such bureaucracy, and everybody in this world was looking for what we call a nekudas ha'emes, some truth. We all want some truth, and when you hear truth, everybody feels a little warmer. That's how it is. But then we go back into what the Chassidim would call Alma de Shikre. It's a falsche Welt. It's a false world. It's a world that worships things that are completely temporary. It's like, I remember, who was it? It was someone, we were by a party, and a guy who was like trying to lose weight. So I saw he's losing a lot of weight. I said, how'd you get yourself finally to do that? He says, I'll tell you what happened. He took the party, there was these like whipped cream little cupcakes or whatever. So he said, let me show you what I did. He took the cupcake and he put it under water, and the whipped cream, which was like whipped cream, very good, appealing to the eye, and very good to the mouth taste, and it started evaporating. It was like disgusting. When whipped cream melts, you don't want to look at it. And he said to me, I started thinking, this is what I'm putting inside my body. And then he says, look, smear it on my fingers, and you can't get it off your fingers, the grease. He says, so that's like what I'm putting inside of me every day. I said, God bless you, because a lot of people have this meditation and it doesn't help, So I was just thinking about it because there's so many things. I wrote an article, I don't know if you remember, it was an article called The Power of 8 Seconds. 8 seconds. Well, I calculated, I don't know, I think it was last year, if not last year, it was a few years ago, it was at a Purim Suda or something. We were sitting at a meal, and I calculated, for some reason, I don't know, my mind went there. I was thinking one of these quirky thoughts. I calculated that it takes around 8 seconds from when you put food into your mouth until it ends up in your gullet, just mush. 8 seconds. Now, how many $1 trillion industry is the food industry for those 8 seconds? If we were all being fed intravenously, or it was all liquefied, just nutrients, that whole industry for 8 stupid little seconds, because it's just the taste, and that you put it, and that's it. There's a whole wine industry and wine tasting. Now, I'm not trying to dismiss. It's just amazing to me. 8 seconds, and no way that this can last. And then it embeds in our minds this memory of this food. I remember, and trust me, I'm guilty of it like everybody. And I remember even having a cold, and tasting food. I can't even taste the food. I'm still eating food just because I remember its taste. Why am I still eating it when you can't even taste it? Because your mind, has some type of pleasure from putting something in your mouth that once tasted good. And try it out. Next time you have no taste, you'll see you're still drawn to the same ridiculous food. And I'm just using these as examples. And at the same time, we can talk about this, and everyone here can laugh and smile in recognition, and we all know it's correct. And then we go right from here to our restaurant and have another good, nice, juicy steak while we're thinking about it. And I've tried that too. I said, okay, let me see. I'm going to appreciate the 8 seconds. But it just shows you the farce. It shows you it's the word I want to use, the insanity of the human condition. Now, if you learn Kabbalah, Chassidus, and you learn about the Arizal, as I mentioned, created a big tzimtzum, and you think of God concealing His whole presence from existence, it makes total sense. That's what we can worship, 8 seconds. Which normal person would worship that? You could get eternity, and you're going to go for the 8 seconds. You can get something about that is real, and you can get something that's false, artificial. That famous Walter Matthau line, where he says, he's pride, he shows off his couch to somebody. He says, it's authentic imitation leather. That's what he says. Someone else says, you drink Diet Coke? I drink the real thing. I drink Coke. As if Coke is the real thing. The whole Coke is... So reality TV. It's reality TV, it's real. You want real? Go to look at a newborn child, look at someone doing something that's sincere, giving to another person. That's real. So we have today, even reality has become now like another commodity. You want some reality? For $1,000, I can give you reality. I remember reading an article, there was this executive, he went on one of these retreats. I don't know if you remember, there was a thing in the 70s and 80s, there was a big thing called Iron Man. Remember a guy called Richard Bly? He created one of these male bonding retreats where men who were considered to become effeminate and lost their manliness and masculinity went to this retreat where you paid good money. So big executives went and so on. And what was the thing? In the retreat, everybody dresses in skins, and grunts and climbs up mountains and chops wood. They get back in touch with the male inside of them. Did you try that one? Okay. Anyway, he comes back after an invigorating weekend. He comes back to his office on Monday morning. This big executive, he's telling everybody at breakfast, the office, they had a breakfast meeting, and he owned a big construction company. And he says, this weekend was unbelievable. We were sweating. We were working hard, So one of the workers in the office says to him, boss, you want to sweat? Why don't you come down on the construction site and you work with us for a day? You'll sweat. So he says, no, I don't have time for that. A weekend a year, 2 weekends a year, I schedule it, etc. So the guy says to him, boss, if you sweat when you want to sweat, it's not sweating at all. That's what he said. He sweats when he wants. He's scheduled sweating. It's called spontaneous dancing at 9 p.m., that type of thing. We're going to be spontaneous for the next 5 minutes. So it also becomes part of the menu. You want reality? No problem. Channel 22. So what we have is a world that is living in its own delusion. And that's why I'm proud to be a Jew, I should say. Why? Because I think about Avraham Avinu, and I think about Yitzchak and Yaakov. And here are people who did not buy into this BS. They just didn't buy into it. And not just philosophically, they wrote a book about it. They changed their whole lives. Avraham Avinu took his whole life. He completely defied his family, left them wherever they were, went on a journey, never to return. Not just for him, to all generations. What would the world be like had there not been Echad Haya Avram? A world that when that one person on earth protested. He protested and decided, we're going a path. He dedicated his life to a life of tzedakah and mishpat. It's against the grain of human nature in the material world to give. Everybody takes. He said, no, we're going to give. And he meant it. And he lived his life that way, and he paid the prices for it. And look who's the only people on earth that remain standing are his grandchildren. Because of that. So you don't need to be, that Avram Avinu should see that. That's why maybe there's only one Avram. Today, the proof is in the pudding. You don't need any persuasion. Look at the facts. Everyone consumed with themselves, came and went. They died. Empires, armies, far greater, with millions and millions and millions of people. Because you can't kill the spirit, and you can't kill such a commitment. That's why I'm proud to be a Jew, just for the record. Because, now I don't see this per se when I say Jewish. What Abraham taught, actually every human being can do. But it's the Jews that carry that flame. That's why it's so sad to see today so many Jews that don't even understand what I'm saying now is actually threatening. Because religion has become all about conformity. When the whole point of it was to go against the whole grain of Mordechai. We're going to soon come to Purim. Think of Mordechai, modern day New York City. Okay, he works in an office, and there's a Haman in the office who's like a big tyrant. He's runs the show. And anyway, and this Haman in this office wants everybody to just, when in the morning you come in, you just give him a little bow. And every Jew and everybody is bowing away. And one guy, Mordechai, comes to the office every day. He refuses to even acknowledge him. He just stands straight. And everybody, all the office people say, what do you got to do that for? Why do you have to instigate him in this? You give him a little bow, make him feel good. Who knows what he's going to do next? And we know what he did next. Because of this, it incites him. He goes and incites and said, let's kill the whole Jewish people. Big thing, one little bow. This becomes Mordechai, HaYehudi. The Gemara says, why is he called Yehudi? There's a lot of names for Jews. Yisrael, Yeah, Bnei Yaakov, Yeshurun, Yehudi. Because Yehudi. Because he's a Kefer b'Aveidah Zarah and Meida b'Chol HaTorah Kol. Yehudi comes from the word acknowledgement. Like Yehuda. Like Moida Ani, Moidim. We find that word very often. Hoid, acknowledgement. Because we only bow to one God. We don't bow to anything. We don't bow to men, and we don't bow down to man-made things either. Because I'm also a man. Why would I bow to another man? Avodim la-Hashem, lo yavodim la-avodim, avodei atem, lo yavodim la-avodim. You're servants of God. You're not servants of servants. Why would any human being with pride worship something that is just like yourself? Which is why it's always so humorous when you find out about a few billion people worshiping this Jew. Why him? There's a whole class of us. Okay, they chose him, fine. But the point I'm making here is that this is the fundamental principle. I'm not even saying anything that you may not have heard before. But you put it into real terms, it comes down to, so what choices do we make today? How are we brought into the material side of things, or to the soulful? I remember once I went to see, my son was studying in yeshiva in Israel, so I went to visit him. I had to go for other reasons, but I went to visit him. So we're in Yerushalayim, we're walking. I was walking to meet him. So I decided to go through Meir Sharim. You may know Meir Sharim, right? Narrow streets, certain look and feel, takes you back to a few centuries. And I happened to be wearing, I guess I was wearing a t-shirt and sunglasses. I don't know what I was wearing exactly. I wasn't exactly dressed Meir Sharim style, but enough tznius not to be stoned. I wasn't doing anything. I was a man, not a woman. Of course, we all see the sign there right before you enter Meir Sharim, how not to dress. That sign is more pornographic than anything I've ever read, because it tells you every detail about the human body, what to cover. So when you read it, it's very titillating, what should we say? Anyway, I come in there, and I'm walking. I just happen to be walking slowly, and I hear two Jews, in the old in the garments of the old world, real Yerushalmis. It was Pasha Lech Lecha. So one of them says to the other in Yiddish, he says to him, you see, we have to be like Avram Avinu. Not be spoiled, not be affected, I'm translating, not be impacted by others. Hold on to the old ways, dress the way this. That's the lesson from Lech Lecha, from Avram Avinu. So since I speak Yiddish quite fluently, so I said to them, which they were pretty shocked, so I say, why? Avram did it because there was no one else dressed like him that way. Now that everybody's dressed this way here, maybe the Lech Lecha is to go and bring Yiddishkeit to everybody else. Why did you decide it's this way? They both almost want, they were completely shocked. Who am I? This. So I said, that's all food for thought. Seid gesund, be well. I wanted them to think maybe I'm an Eliyahu Novi type that came just to give them a message. I didn't want to stay around too long. So I don't know if they got the message, but I just remember it was very interesting because they were talking about nonconformity in the deepest possible way. And I'm not, don't get me wrong, I have no problem with, it says that in Mitzrayim, the Jews did not change their names and their garments and so on. It's interesting that the garments, many people still hold on to the names. It's another thing. I'm not sure how that works. But, so we understand that part of living in this world is, you have a uniform. Army has a uniform, and people, even in sports, there's uniforms. So uniform symbolizes it. But if a uniform becomes more important than everything else, you can imagine what that tells him. I would love to know how Avram Avinu would have commented on that. Because he for sure didn't wear a uniform. What uniform did he wear? Who was he supposed to copy? There was no one to copy. There were no Jewish uniforms yet. He probably wore a few robes. And if he'd be around today, he'd probably be thrown out because he'd look like some Eastern guru or something, Okay, fine. The point is like this. We say in Eishes Chayil, at the end of Eishes Chayil, which we sing or say Friday nights, from the book of Mishlei, at the end, so it says there, Sheker Achen v'Hevel Yefi. Kim Yiras, Isha Yiras Hashem Hitis Halal. That's the expression. Which means false is Chen, grace. And Sheker Achen, false, and Hevel, and emptiness, vanity, is beauty. What's really, what we should aspire to, what we should praise, should value, is a Yiras Hashem, a woman that has awe of God, fear of God. So, beautiful expression. You have a similar one also in another pasuk where it says, Al Yisal Chacham B'Chachmasei. You shouldn't be proud about being wise or a gibur and so on. You should be proud of how you serve God. So everyone takes this verse very literally, that says, don't focus on externals. Focus on what counts most. But here's a chotz kasha, as they say, a simple question. How could the Torah say, Sheker HaChein v'Hevel HaYefi? Chein and Yefi are not bad things. Chein, Noach Motza Chein. Noach found grace in God's eyes. Chein is considered to be a virtue. Someone has grace, someone has chein. Chein is not some empty nothing. And Yefi, so why does the Torah praise the Imos, our matriarchs? Yifas Teyar, Yifas Mara. Two different expressions of a beautiful face, something a beautiful shape or beautiful glow. Beauty is a big thing, and even furthermore, even in mitzvahs, you have Zek Keli Vanveyu, and it says that you should beautify mitzvahs. But Misna Lacha, the mitzvahs, a beautiful mezuzah, a beautiful Sefer Torah, even the external beauty, it's meant to be that Judaism should be done in a beautiful way. The Beis Hamikdash was built with tiferes, with beauty. It wasn't just put together a shack and just a divine home. It was also physically beautiful. So why would the pasuk say it's such a? Why would it dismiss it? So one of the main interpretations is the pasuk, the verse is not dismissing it. It's saying if you have Yiras Hashem, then the beauty and the chein are infused with that, and they're also lifted up to that level. The verse is referring to someone that only has that only focuses on the external. Because beauty, real beauty, is inner and outer. In Hebrew, there's a word, when you say face. In English, the face of something, whether it's the face of a person, or the face of an object, or you say at face value, at the face of it. Face means external, outer, actually superficial. In Hebrew, the word face is panim. Panim also means panim. It doesn't just mean outer, it also means inner. Same word. Because in Judaism there's no seamlessness, there's no duality. What you see, the inside and the outside should be the same. It's called seamless. Inner beauty radiates to the outer level, and outer reflects on the inner. Yes, so in a world where there's a split between the two, like I said, the 8 seconds. So you'll say, 1 second, if it's only 8 seconds, so why is it a mitzvah on Shabbos to have pleasure? It says clearly in eating and drinking. The Torah should say, Shabbos, have tainug in davening and learning. Those are eternal. It says also in the physical. Because the point is not to annihilate the material world. It's to elevate those 8 seconds by you appreciating that it's not about the food, it's about something higher that you're achieving. And I always share the analogy with, I always find it a beautiful analogy of the Baal Shem Tov. It just works so apt in so many areas. It's actually an analogy given why Chassidim say l'chaim from time to time. But it's also an analogy over Judaism in general. The way I always explain it is like this. This is a little preface before I tell you the Baal Shem Tov's analogy. When you ask Jews, you ask someone, you think about Jewish holidays. What's the first thing that comes to mind? Without thinking twice, food. Right? Every holiday has its food. We're coming up to Purim, so there's a Hamantashen, there's a Kreplach. There's probably some other foods everybody can identify with. Pesach, that's a whole other story. It's a whole special menus and foods and so on. Shavuos has its blintzes, and Chanukah its latkes. And then there's Rosh Hashanah, sweet foods, etc. And even Yom Kippur, we're obsessed with not eating. It's another obsession. And then Erev Yom Kippur, you're supposed to eat twice, just in case you're wondering. So food is very prominent in the Jewish world. Food industry, Some say Jews have a famine gene. That's why they're always making sure they're at every dessert and they never miss a... if you go on a Jewish cruise, you'll see what I mean. There's no such thing as missing a snack even if it's 2 a.m. And everybody wakes up for the snack, and everyone says, it'd be crazy to wake up. But they're all there. Long lines. Could you miss? So I developed that there's a famine gene, that Jews, because we were once in the desert and so on, we developed a gene. You never know when the next famine may strike, so you have to always stock up, like that thing. But that's a joke. So food. So what's so spiritual about food? What exactly why is that so uplifting? Food, everywhere food. So it says Shabbos, mitzvah la'ange, ba'achile, shtiyah. And Bosa Shoman, Yayin Yoshan, which means fatty meat and vintage wine. So Baal Shem Tov's analogy is a great analogy. He said that the analogy is with a king and who's aging and ailing, and he wants to leave his throne to his son, his heir. But he knows his son grew up in the palace, spoiled, always was given everything he wanted. And he never earned his way. So he says, you know what, I'm going to send my son away from the palace. I'll send him to a distant land. And there let him earn his way. So one day he'll develop the sensitivity to be a true good and noble leader. Okay, the king's very sad about doing it, but he knows that's for the best. The day comes, he cries, it's sad, he sends his son away. Before he sends him away, he tells him, look, remember, I'm sure that you may forget one day that you come from this place, but remember you're coming from a palace. And one day you're going to be the leader of this great nation. Because you may forget, I'm going to send you a letter several times a year to remind you where you come from. Okay. They part. Yes, exactly as the father predicted, the king predicted, the son begins to forget, he starts assimilating, starts becoming part of the town people. But he gets his letter every several times a year. He gets a letter. When he gets the letter, he suddenly remembers. So he wants simcha. He wants to celebrate. The problem is, how is he going to celebrate here in some little town? Nobody knows the king. Nobody knows. What is he going to tell people? We're celebrating for what? That I'm going to be your next king? He knows that they would be resentful, or they'd be even hurt him. They think he's crazy. So he has a great idea. It's Baal Shem Tov's mashal. He calls one day, says going to be a party, free cocktails, free food, all on me. Oh, great. So the whole town is celebrating because they're getting the drinks, they're getting the food. Meanwhile, he's celebrating with them for another reason entirely, because he received a letter from his father. So Baal Shem Tov's metaphor goes like this, the moral of the story, of the metaphor, of the mashal. That God is the king, and the way souls are in heaven, they're in a palace. They don't earn their way. They have everything they need. There's no challenges. There's no material world. There's no health issues. So he sends them away from the palace to earn your way. I'm going to send you a place you'll forget where you come from. Melamdim kol ha'Torah kula, in your mother's womb, and then Meshachei, the angel makes us forget. We come into the world, we have no clue of what happened, where we come from. But to remind us, God sends us Yom Tevim and Shabbosim. He sends us letters to remind us that you're not made of this world. You're coming from another reality. So what is the neshama going to do? It lives in a physical world. The physical world is not interested in spiritual letters. So the Rebbe says, you know what? Give your body free cocktails, food. Give it whatever it wants. Make it happy on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So the body will celebrate because it's got a good meal. Doesn't ask questions. Give me a good meal anytime. And the soul can celebrate because it's received a letter, a hamshacha of Elokus, a divine message. This is the metaphor. It could be used in so many ways. Yaakov and Esav, Yaakov dressing up in the garments of Esav, etc. I find the metaphor so powerful because it's a very good visualization of life. Now, unfortunately, most of Judaism today, we know about the food, we forgot about the letter. I don't know how the mashal works with that. I guess we know the mashal, so it reminds us. But the bottom line is that the yefi, beauty, and chen are great things. Just as food could be a great thing. But if you start thinking, this is it, and you become a selfish individual instead of a selfless individual, then the material world traps you. When you use the material world and recognize that it's only a so-called candy to give the animal soul or the body, so it should just go along for the ride and cooperate, it's a whole different perspective. And that's what Perkudei ultimately teaches us. As we discussed healthy, unhealthy group mentality, herd mentality. There's also healthy and unhealthy individualism. Individuality was not given to us to become parasites. It's been given to us to make a unique mark in this world that you and only you can make. That's the bottom line. And Perkudei means to count, one by one. You count each an individual. Later we'll learn another Perkudei, Sefer Perkudim in Bamidbar, where God counts the Jewish people. So Rashi asked the question, why does he count them? So he says, because of their preciousness, because he loves them. You count them all the time. So many commentaries say, well, it's not all the time, it's only 10 counts in all of history. That's what he says. Ramban explains why does counting have to do with being precious? Why do you count things that are precious? So he answers a beautiful answer. He says, because when you count things, you have to look at it. And when you love something, you want to see it. And you look at your children, and you look at them each individual. You don't look at them as a group. Yeah, even when you have to take them all somewhere, everyone's unique. So Perkudei teaches us the focus on the uniqueness of every individual and the love that each individual has to get fitting to its needs. And not about yourself, but about the giving part. So you bring these two chapters every year together. So Yaakov Perkudei, the messages, they come together. But then there are years like this one, where there's a focus. 1 week you focus on the group, and 1 week you focus on the individual. And at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves a simple question. No business can function without a mission statement. Can you function without a mission statement? Without a personal mission statement? Why were you sent to this earth? What was you sent to accomplish? You don't want to find out at the end of your life, and may everyone live long and healthy, that you didn't even begin, or you barely touched upon why you were sent here. And you did all kinds of things that were very nice, and maybe made you comfortable and so on, but nothing to do with the tachlis, habriya, why you were created, your purpose. So I think in a parsha like this, a chapter like this, as we finish the book of Exodus, we left Egypt, the whole story of the Jews' beginning of their journey. It comes down to one most important thing of all, our journey of the soul to this earth. What is the purpose of why you're here? And even if we don't completely transform our lives in that direction, if you think about it once a day, it's also nice. Because if you think about it, the goal, of course, is that you act on it. And the end of it is that you have something unique inside of you to contribute, to give to others. I don't know if there's a greater thing that you can achieve in this world than doing that. Because number one, you live up to your own calling. Number two, others benefit from it. And number three, it's forever. Because that's eternal. Everything else is temporary. Everything you take doesn't last. What you give is forever. You know, I've told the story with Moses Montefiore when Queen Victoria asked him, how much are you worth? He's one of the biggest, wealthiest people in history. He built up a lot of Yerushalayim. You hear the name Montefiore, Hospital Montefiore. It was Moses Montefiore. He was a big philanthropist from England. Queen Victoria was a very noble queen. So she asked him, they were friends, how much are you worth, Sir Moses? She said, I'll get back to you. He comes back to her with a number. And the number is far, far lower. She says, you mock me. I personally know that you have more greater holdings than that. And he answered, no, Your Majesty, I told you the truth. The number you know is the number of money right now I'm controlling, but it's not what I have. Because that money tomorrow can be lost in a bad investment, can be confiscated, a war can break out, all kinds of things can happen. Could be stolen. Well, the money I gave away to charity, the money that I used to build institutions, that is what I really own. It's the only thing that remains forever. And that's the number I gave you. So, he was, if you read the story of Moses Montefiore, you see the rare people who understand the purpose of their gifts. So, in conclusion, what shall I say is that we as a Jewish people are an example of eternity because we understood the secret. And it wasn't even the amounts. Centuries where Jews were all in poverty, basically. but they understood the concept that life is about giving. That's why they understood that a family is more important than a business. And that's why they understood that the center of Jewish life was not even in the synagogue, it was in the home. And unfortunately, many of us have maybe forgotten some of that. So we're here to remind each other and try to refocus. And remember, what hangs in the balance is not just a matter of it's life and death. It's the future, forever and ever. And that's something in our hands that each of us can control. So Perkudei has great messages for us. Even though Perkudei Mishkan talks about the counting of the material that Moses gathered, but it tells us the power of each individual thing. He gave an accounting for every penny, for every detail. Not just because he had to give it due to accountability, it was not his money, it's the money of the tzibur, of the community, but also because it teaches the value of individuality. But only an individuality that's focused to be Perkudei HaMishkan. Not individuality for self-worship or for self-aggrandizement or self-absorption, self-interest, but a self that's dedicated to building a temple in this world. And that's what ultimately our uniqueness is. So God should bless you all, us all. Everybody should embrace and discover your unique voice and use it well. And that always will attract other unique voices. It creates a unity because secure people who are giving tend to draw to themselves other people who are also giving. That's how it is. Quality draws quality. And I don't know about parasites draw parasites. That's another question. Ein adam chayte b'leilei, they say. So I guess you don't really care about someone else's selfishness unless it serves your interest. But giving, because you're not focusing on yourself, is by nature one that you want to be around people like that. So I think it's a nice lift to be able to, a nice blessing to be able to say that people should want to be around you. And you can imagine people don't want to be around parasites, even though some know how to masquerade. But still, at the end of the day, you start feeling drained and used and exploited. So as I said, God should bless us all. And this, as we come to the conclusion of the first Adar, joy, and the beginning of the next, real joy, as I discussed a few weeks ago when we started this month, comes from not the external happiness. It comes from the happiness of just being happy with yourself. You're satisfied with your content, and people who are content are people who comes from within a certain element of wholesomeness, as opposed to everyone who's chasing their tail and constantly looking for happiness here, there, and there. So everyone should have a very good week and a very meaningful week. And again, I always say, a meaningful life. We're here in any way that we could help you. Your individuality emerge and celebrate. Please stay in touch and through email or whatever other way you want to connect. And I would like to dedicate the class, the Mazel Tov to Lily Namworth and Pesach Walker on their wedding next week. And Philip is not going to be having his class tomorrow. Philip is a good old colleague and friend and student of mine for many years now. So it's beautiful to see. He's now marrying off a daughter, Lily. And as we said, it perpetuates eternity, generation to generation. I'm a personal witness of the investment that Philip, his wife Nancy, made. So it's an honor to be able to participate in this marriage. I hope he's watching and hearing this. If not, he could always get the replay on YouTube. And again, everyone have a very beautiful week. It's always an honor. Thank you very much. Just tell me.